Perfect. So today's schedule is first up is Kevin Walter from Netrix, is our senior solution architect, and he's going to discuss and demo Microsoft's Defender ATP, which takes Microsoft Defender that comes to Windows 10, but adds a lot more functionality from a security standpoint as well, and he'll walk through that. And then our webinar sponsor for the day is Flexera software, and Bob from Flexera is going to talk about some of the solutions that complements Microsoft Management. And I believe today's topic is going to talk about Admin Studio. So that's a little switch from the agenda. And then our friend Steve from Microsoft, he's a premier field engineer, and he's going to take our last topic from 1:10 Central to 2 o'clock and talk about test sequencing and the application model. So Stephen will finish and wrap up. And then once the meeting is done, we'll publish the video on YouTube and send that along if you want to rewatch it or share that among friends. So with that, I'll turn that over to Kevin to intro himself and go through his presentation. And if everybody could mute during the presentation, it'll be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Walter. I'm an architect, as Jay said, at Netrix. So my background is in all things Microsoft 365. So a core focus around security, identity, even email in the old days, and now seeing a lot more of interest around the Defender ATP product line. So before we get started, I have a quick poll. I just put a quick question in the group, in the chat, in the Teams meeting chat. I'd like to get a feel for how familiar everyone is with Defender ATP. So if you could give me kind of a 1 to 5 ranking, 1 being the least familiar, 5 being the most familiar with the product set, and that'll kind of help guide me in the presentation today. So I appreciate it. Lots of 2s and 3s. Awesome. Appreciate everyone's participation.
Where is it? I didn't see it pop up.
The meeting chat?
The poll. Oh, it's in the chat.
Yeah.
Where's my chat? Where?
All right, I appreciate that.
I'm locked out of the chat, so.
Oh, that's okay. I think I got a good pulse for kind of collectively where everyone's at, so I appreciate all that. We'll go ahead and get started. So as a whole, the biggest gap that Microsoft recognized in this endpoint security space is how historically we have a whole bunch of different agents. That's what you see on the right-hand side of the screen, protecting an endpoint from different threat vectors. So those are the ones on the left. Everything from the latest malware, polymorphic malwares, zero-day attacks, fileless attacks, vulnerability management, all of that represents a different component, a different team, and ultimately a different endpoint. And that's where Microsoft Defender ATP is meant to fill that gap, be a single agentless, in many cases, experience for a security operations team to manage and protect their endpoints. So I'll try to get through the slides as quickly as I can and get into the demo so we can get a feel for what it looks like. From a licensing perspective, this is part of the Windows 10 E5 or Defender ATP SKU, which is rolling up to E5 security or the M365 E5. That's the per user basis. For servers, it's a per device basis, Azure Security Center standard tier. As long as you have that in your subscription, then you can license that for your Defender ATP for your servers. And then you can see the platform coverage as well on the right. So notably here, Defender ATP sensor is built into Windows 10, as well as the latest revs for Windows Server. Other versions of Windows, the down-level Windows versions, use the Microsoft Monitoring Agent, or MMA, who you may remember from such things as OMS or SCOM or Sentinel as well. So same agent reporting that data into the workspace. Also available for Mac, public preview for Linux, and also super ultra secret private preview for iOS and Android. So having a little bit of testing fun with the Android version so far and getting some experience for how that entirety of the landscape can be protected. Deployment options, pretty straightforward here. We always recommend using Microsoft Endpoint Manager with our customers because we get the best experience. And there's a couple of key features that you only get when you use Intune, the cloud-powered side of the endpoint management cycle to deploy Defender ATP. Two of those are compliance, device compliance, meaning I can evaluate device compliance in my conditional access policies if the device has Defender ATP onboarded and does not have any malicious threats on the device. The other piece there is tamper protection. So being able to have a signed MDM channel that pushes down my AV settings means no malicious applications can try to change the antivirus or EDR settings on my endpoint. However, we can always fall back to Endpoint Configuration Manager to deploy very easily, or group policy, or even a local script, which is what I'll demo here later today. The idea of onboarding or deployment here for Windows 10, like I mentioned, it's built into the operating system. So when we onboard our systems, all we're doing is turning on a couple of services and pointing the registry at our tenant location where we'll actually send the data that helps us protect the endpoint. And I'll get into the architecture when I go into a quick demo of the console in a minute here. I'm going to try to get through the next few slides pretty quickly. A whole bunch of core functionality feature set items around Defender ATP, and then we'll see these in action as well. So starting off with threat and vulnerability management. So all of these being our challenges around the vulnerability management or TVM space. Historically, using things like Tenable or Nessus scans to find vulnerabilities at a point in time, whereas Defender ATP, because that's always reporting information on the operating system, will give us that visibility here as well. Getting some feedback if someone could maybe mute their mic. Next up, attack surface reduction. So again, challenges that we see around our ASR rules. You're probably familiar with these if they've been around in the Windows 10 space for a while. Now we have a way to easily manage those, as well as report on them for the purposes of tuning and exceptions. So all of these represent components of the exploit guard stack, and we'll leverage things like network protection, controlled folder access, and then our ASR rules. Think of the ASR rules, those on the right-hand side here, as our zero-day killers. So all of these represent specific actions that, Office launching a child process that is frequently weaponized by attackers. So we want to block that and lock it down as much as possible. When we talk about next generation antivirus, there's a model that I'll show on the next slide here that sort of represents the entirety of how Defender operates. It's the client plus cloud model. So you've got your core Defender antivirus that's built into Windows 10, and then you have the vast majority of the machine learning that happens on the Defender ATP layer occurs in the cloud. So architecturally, Defender ATP is like a black box cockpit recorder in an airplane. Everything that happens on the device is captured and then shipped up to the cloud where that ML processing happens. So things like the most common malwares are going to be blocked by your AV settings, just as they are today. Defender ATP takes that to the next layer. With polymorphic threats that are brand new every environment they hit, we have the ability to detect those based on the behavioral threats that occur. Which then leads us to the EDR market category. This is all about fileless attacks, behavioral attacks, things that are not necessarily based on a bad piece of malware being on the device, but more sophisticated attacks like leveraging 0 days or vulnerabilities. And so the same model here, we've got a component on the client endpoint that ships that data up to the cloud where the vast majority of that processing occurs. So again, the impact or the differentiator here from a traditional agent-based approach is where if the agent on the endpoint is doing all of that processing, that's where we start to see performance impact for the user. Users start complaining, the AV is too intrusive, blah, blah, blah. So that's where putting that data into the cloud and having that client-powered endpoint provides the mitigation for that. Another big trend we see from security teams that we talk to across the board is that just having a lack of resources and a lack of focus and being able to respond to threats that occur on our devices So that's where we want to automate as much of the well-known threats as we can. So the automated investigation capabilities, this was powered by an acquisition Microsoft did called Hexadite. And again, using the data that we uncover on the client, using the cloud environment to run through that process. And I'll show you what one of these looks like in action as well. And now let's take that another step further, being able to leverage Microsoft Threat Experts, as they call it, to get two components of this managed hunting service. One is targeted attack notifications. So if Microsoft identifies a targeted attack against your devices, you'll get a special proactive alert in your tenant recognizing that that's occurring. The second piece is experts on demand. So if I recognize, or I'm not too sure exactly what a piece of software is doing, or I think something's going on with this endpoint, I can click a button and send that information over to Microsoft for their security researchers to comment on. So that was a whole bunch of brain dump information. Any questions on anything that I talked about so far as core functionality?
For the experts on demand feature, is there a limitation for how many requests can be sent from the organization?
The audio was cutting out a little bit, but I think I got the question is there a limit to the threat experts or the experts on demand service? So this is part of your Microsoft Premier contract. So I'm not too sure if there are limits per se. It's not really meant to be an MSSP model where you have someone proactively monitoring everything that occurs, but it is a chargeable basis up and step above beyond the Defender ATP platform.
Gotcha.
Other questions so far? All right, let's jump into a quick demo. So this is my landing page. Securitycenter.windows.com is where I'm at. And this is our security operations dashboard. So as an analyst, I've jumped in here and at a glance, I can see that, any alerts that are going on in my environment, any active automated investigations that have occurred.
I don't know if you're showing anything, Kevin. I don't see anything.
Anyone else?
Yeah,
Same. I don't see anything.
Let me try one more time. Any luck?
Not yet.
Not yet.
No.
Negative.
That's odd. All right, let me try a third time here. Nothing yet, huh?
Nope.
All right, let me hop out real quick and I'll jump back in the meeting. Not sure what's going on here.
There you go.
Oh, good. That was odd. Got stuck on the loading screen. Anyway, everyone else is seeing my screen, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, much better. So my landing page, the Defender Security Center, it's securitycenter.windows.com. This is my cloud-based interface where I would go to manage and respond as alerts are occurring in my environment. So as soon as my Wi-Fi catches up to the presentation, then I'll be able to advance forward from here. Oh, this is just killing me today.
What modem are you using?
I don't even remember.
300 BPS, huh?
Yeah, my Comcast here in Chicago has been kind of sluggy this morning too. I don't know if it's just a lot of traffic.
I'm out in the suburbs with Comcast Business, and I get occasional when I'm on like Zoom events that that your internet is unstable, and then it goes away after a few seconds. Don't know if that helps anybody.
Is my screen still up?
You're fine.
Okay,
Yep, looks
awesome. Okay, so I talked about the architecture a little bit, how this is built into the operating system. It's always collecting data. So let's take a look at a machine here. A couple things I'll notice, right? At a glance, I can see some tags that I've assigned to the machine. It's a demo machine. I see my data sensitivity, so I'll touch on that in a little bit here as well. And basic information about the device, the operating system, etc. Now, let's go and drill into the timeline here. So this is not necessarily malicious activity. This is everything that's happening on the device right now. So this event, remote desktop connection observed on the machine, service host accepted a connection from this IP address. This executable successfully connected to this IP. Well, hey, if I thought this might be malicious, I can pop over here. I see more about the process tree. Azure Site Recovery sounds suspicious. You know what, I'm going to take this IP address and I'm going to block it across my enterprise here with this interface because I've got network protection and custom indicators enabled here. All of the raw data here can be queried and accessed. I see files being created anytime I modify, rename, move a file. All of that data is captured in the timeline view. Again, not necessarily malicious. Those will be surfaced in alerts here. From a manual standpoint, as an analyst here, I have some tasks up at the top. I'll call these machine actions. So I can kick off a Defender antivirus scan, pretty self-explanatory, a remediation full scan here. Getting a little more aggressive, I can restrict app execution. So lock this down so only Microsoft signed applications can run on the device. Getting a little more aggressive here, machine isolation means I'm going to cut off all network connectivity to the device except to the Defender Security Center. So I've got a very active, malicious, critical threat on the device. I need to prevent lateral spread in my organization. I'm going to hit the machine isolation button here to do that.
So how does that piece work? Just out of curiosity, does it interface with like the Windows firewall then for isolation?
Even deeper. So this uses your NIC layer to cut off
Okay.
network access except to the security center here.
Okay.
There's an option when you click on that button to allow Skype and Teams Outlook connectivity so you can communicate with the end user there.
Excellent.
Question. If
Yep.
I have non-traditional devices, i.e. Things like Internet of Things, can I cut those off too, or do I need the if it's going to run at the level you described, it sounds like I could cut those off too, just on the basis of them having something that's conceptually a NIC, right?
It depends on the operating system. So support here is going to be for these machine actions are mostly limited to the latest Win 10 revs. A lot of these are being backported and rolled out for like Mac OS as well. But if it's a Win 10 IoT, possible. It's not something I've tested, but this is meant primarily around the behavioral response to something that I'm seeing on a user endpoint.
Or I'm wondering about Linux versions. It's going to be would be the thing that I might expect these to be on.
Sure. Yeah. Certainly conceivable in the future. I know Linux just went into public preview with the Defender ATP.
Yeah, the Sphere.
Other questions? So I also have the ability to do a live response session. This is an in-browser shell to view any files on the machine, to upload scripts and run them on the machine, more targeted or manual response actions that I want to take. I can kick off a general purpose automated investigation. So I'll come back to this in a minute, but we touched on this very briefly in the slides. This is, I see something strange. I want to just go and run a deep clean analysis. Think of this as our modern day AV scan, to be honest. I don't even like using the AV scan button. I'm more inclined to say, okay, there's something, one alert maybe that triggered something a little suspicious. I'm going to kick off a deep automated investigation on the endpoint. Something else I skipped over is investigation package. If you have a purpose here, you can download a whole bunch of forensic information about the machine. This is, all of the startup reg keys, running processes, all of that data. The reason I don't really need that is because I can collect that automatically as part of an automated investigation. Now, this will give me a zip file that I can take offline, but I can also pull that information through an investigation as well. Here's my option for consulting threat experts as well. So, hey, Microsoft, I see something strange going on Barbara's PC. Can you take a look? So running across the top here, security recommendations. This is the threat and vulnerability management I mentioned, module I mentioned earlier. So I see that we've got some active weaknesses for this version of 7-zip, 400 plus weaknesses for Adobe Reader, including some that have an active denial of service exploit available. So this is a lot of the data that you'd see traditionally on a vulnerability scan, but now this data is constantly, continuously being fed into the system. There's two components of the TVM module. One is secure configuration assessment. That's where we see things like turn on PUA protection or the new shadow protection, or there's vulnerabilities like I see here at the top. And these are ranked typically by the impact score to the endpoint to improve that security posture. For those vulnerabilities, I can look at this through the opposite lens through which CVEs I'm exposed to, as well as any missing Windows KBs on the endpoint. Luckily, this one's up to date. Software inventory, pretty self-explanatory, just reading my add remove programs here. Now, I wouldn't typically never consume these from the single machine page. I'm more inclined to tackle this from an enterprise view, which I'll come to in a minute here. So we've got a whole bunch of alerts that have occurred across my devices here. Let's take a look at one. Saw this alert occurred, suspicious PowerShell command line. I can drill in to the machine timeline here. And get more information about the specific alert, what occurred. In some cases, also see the exact commands that were run on the device. Now, each of those alerts also get correlated into incidents. Now, incidents, think of this as a force multiplier for when you consume information, because there was a whole bunch of alerts, but I can also, if I the system has automatically pulled those together based on similar characteristics. This is more inclined to align with how attackers are running down the kill chain. So they're not going to stop at just running that suspicious PowerShell command, but if they get access to the machine, they're going to take other actions, including suspicious behavior in Microsoft Word, backdoors detected, suspicious scheduled tasks. All of this data occurred across just a couple of machines here. Looks like started on Barbara's and then got all the way up to our domain controller. And all of this data got correlated into this incident automatically for me. So across these 37 alerts, I can work this incident as a whole. And if I've already closed out these alerts as I have here, I can go ahead and resolve the incident from this standpoint. So operationally, consume through incidents, think of that as our default go-to to help clear the alert queue. Everything in Defender ATP is also very contextually aware. So you'll see severity of these incidents and of the respective alerts that's going to be relevant if, let's say it was an active piece of malware that was found on the device, but Defender AV successfully cleaned it. We may see that come in as just an informational severity rather than low, medium, or high. I talked about my automated investigations as my go-to for behavioral analysis. So, something strange happened, Microsoft Word, some suspicious behavior occurred here. So this was triggered by 8 different alerts, primarily the suspicious behavior by Microsoft Word alert, ran through and analyzed 3,900 entities on my device. It was only on Barbara's machine here, and I found 5 pieces of evidence. So let's drill in a bit more. These were those 8 alerts that caused this automated investigation to kick off. Just one machine. These were the key findings. This file was quarantined. And if I want to get a view of everything that was analyzed as part of this investigation, so over this 13, 14-minute time span, going through each of these 2,600 files and getting a verdict from the cloud service based on those different entities. Check all my services, looking for anything suspicious, because again, I saw a handful of suspicious alerts. I need to run through and make sure this device is clean. If I want to see the specific investigative actions that occurred here, just to get a feel for what might have taken place, I can go through this list in the log as well. And this is good information if you have an external case management software that you want to archive this information for. So 417 files were analyzed in the span of 4 seconds. This raw input data was shipped up to the cloud and quickly checked against file signatures for clean file hashes. So again, think back to our primary chief concern with security teams being short-staffed and short on time. Now we have the ability to automate a lot of our first and second tier response. Again, with the goal being automate as much as possible, but still then from a context perspective, knowing which of my alerts I need to work as an analyst first. I'll pause again for any questions on the AV or security operations experience here before I shift over to our threat and vulnerability management.
Mal, did you create any of those automations, or are those kind of come with the product?
This is all out of the box functionality. So if I wanted to take this a step further, let's say anytime I see suspicious behavior from Microsoft Word, I could create what's called a custom detection rule that anytime this alert fires, I'm going to, I don't know, restrict app execution on the device, run one of those machine actions manually. I wouldn't even call that scripting. That's just more out of box functionality. This investigation was straight turn it on and that alert happens and it runs. But if I want to take it a step further, maybe add in some approval workflows, like, hey, if Barbara's machine gets impacted, trigger an approval to the security manager who has to click approve. And then once that happens, the machine isolates. All that is doable here.
And then how long is that data stored?
Good question. So this data will stick here for up to a maximum of 6 months based on our configuration here in the data retention period. So it's capped out at 180 days. And
did you say there was a way to automate, like isolating a computer off the network if it detects something? You know, because some of us don't have, you know, a 24-hour SOC. So if it detects something, is there a way to isolate that computer off the network until we're able to investigate it?
For sure. Yeah. So let me just briefly touch on advanced hunting. So from a proactive threat hunting perspective, all of that raw telemetry that I saw on our endpoints is captured and queryable, assuming my phone hotspot hasn't also died on me today. We can see it here. So you can see the schema up here, everything that was going on my devices. I have the ability to write queries on it. And so, come on. You can get an idea of some of the options. I can check for clear text passwords in the registry, looking for PowerShell downloads, hidden PowerShell windows, hit files with double extensions, good indicator that something ransomware style is happening on this device. I have a whole bunch of built-in APT campaigns if I'm looking for specific analysis here. Let's see if this loads any faster. So any of the indicators of compromise for this baby shark threat, anything in the last, so here's an example of the query language. I can, of all of my device process events, anything in the last 7 days, I'm going to look for this query in the command line, modifying the registry, or this command line query, or this one. And if any results are returned, hopefully none in this environment, we'll get that data here. Now, this is something I can run manually, but also do what's called a custom detection rule. This is how it's great out here because I don't have rights in this environment, but I would be able to run through, create a detection rule, and then, as you said, do machine isolation if a specific condition was found. Any other questions?
Yeah, does this have a dark theme or dark mode?
I don't know the answer to that. I do not believe so.
Okay.
Asking the important ones. So I mentioned on my machine view that I never really consume that information there, and that's because I have an enterprise-wide view that gives me the most impactful actions I can take in my organization to improve my security posture. So again, all contextually aware here, I can see which of my machines are most exposed based on vulnerabilities or configuration, misconfigurations here. And always right in front and center is my top security recommendations. So that update to, I think it was WinRAR, had an outsized score to improve my security posture. So drop my exposure score by 35. So I can quickly see which of my machines are exposed, which of the CVEs that are relevant here. And I can even create a security task to go over to Intune or ServiceNow or my ITSM platform for that desktop engineering team to remediate this activity.
So quick question, is there a limit to how many clients you can use this tool for, or is this unlimited?
Technical limits? I don't believe so. Was that your question?
Yes, yes. So if I have over 100,000 PCs globally, I could implement this without any problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a couple of the customers I'm working with right now. One is about 450,000 endpoints that we're ramping up to. Another just across the 60,000 endpoint list. So yeah, definitely scales well. I mean, this is all. There's no data storage or consumption costs here. All of this data is stored in the Microsoft cloud. There's no additional consumption charges for that.
Thank you.
And one question I do have, this data obviously can be put, you could actually get this information in Sentinel as well, right? I would imagine.
Correct. Yeah. Integrate with Sentinel or any other SIM platform of choice through the APIs. There's a couple different API options depending on what you're trying to consume. The latest one being the Alerts API, and Sentinel obviously has very native integration as well.
With this being stored in, I imagine Azure as it is, would there be consumption costs with Sentinel and Azure then, or is this included like everything else was with, with Office 365 and that data that's in there already?
Mm-hmm. I don't believe this is included, but I don't know 100% for sure on that one. Good question though. So I can see, over my vulnerability cycle here, as the score improves based on new weaknesses being released or new vulnerabilities being observed in the wild across my ecosystem of software. I see Patch Tuesday, Windows 10 has a bunch of new vulnerabilities. So again, because I'm collecting all of that historical data, I also have the ability to retroactively see what my exposure is to different threats that I hear about in the wild. So let's say I get a call from my leadership team that they want to make sure that we're covered. They saw something about a new ransomware targeting my organization. I can quickly come into this interface, the threat analytics dashboard, and read about this particular set of threats based on the information that Microsoft's security researchers have published, but then most importantly, immediately see my exposure level from my machines. So luckily I've got 19 machines that are completely secured from the ransomwares that are described in this summary, which is actually pretty cool reading if I have tons of time on my hands. Some queries to proactively look for those alerts. And then the recommended mitigations here for my one exposed machine is I need to turn on real-time protection within Defender AV. So this is some pre-canned information that's very easy to copy and paste in as my executive summary of what these different threats are and ensuring that we're covered. Any other questions while I shift to another quick demo here? Fingers crossed on my screen this time. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Yeah, you're logging in. Yeah, that's your backyard.
So I talked a little bit about the different deployment options, and I want to demonstrate how this works. So I've downloaded the onboarding package here, which from a ease of use perspective to onboard my systems is right here, this package. They say up to 10 machines just to give you some context. And again, I prefer to do this through my MDM channel with Intune, or I can download the same package for my endpoint configuration manager policy as well. But here I've got that local script downloaded. It's just a CMD file that I will run as an admin on my device here. And I approve all of that. And I'm all set. So there was no executable, no MSI. There was nothing to install here. I built this VM about an hour before the meeting today as just a stock Windows 10 image. So everything's done from a deployment perspective. This system is now going to start reporting telemetry into the Defender console. Now, what happened under the hood, if I take a look at my services on this machine, I now see the Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection service in a running state. This is the Sense service, or MS Sense. This is what controls the shipping of telemetry up to my cloud service. So now this machine within the next few minutes will start reporting in data to my tenant. Any questions on the onboarding experience? Pretty self-explanatory.
Is this compatible with if we're running like third-party antivirus solutions, or is it advised to end that and just use the Windows Defender?
Great question. It is compatible. So Windows Security Center that runs on Windows 10, every Windows 10 system has Windows Security Center. That's your broker service that manages the AV on the endpoint. So if you have a third-party endpoint protection, like, I don't know, Semantic Endpoint Protection or McAfee, that will actually disable Defender AV being in active mode. Now you can onboard to Defender ATP that'll actually put the AV component in passive mode, but you are still sort of hamstringing yourself there in terms of being able to have that end-to-end protection. So if I think back to the conceptual slides a few minutes ago where I see the cloud managed protection that's powered by having that client endpoint, some of that functionality may not fire when you don't have real-time protection and all of the other Defender AV features enabled as well.
Can you use the ATP agent to move from one AV to another? The challenge we had is moving from McAfee over to Trend. We had to use a Trend package to enable McAfee to install it, something analogous to do.
The audio was a little choppy there. I think you asked if we can use this to move between antivirus platforms.
Correct. So can you leverage the package in order to activate ATP and then while you have your other, but then use that endpoint in order to uninstall and remove the other and then move into an active scanning capability?
Got it. Yeah. So I think shifting to Defender as an endpoint security platform, yes, I always start off, I typically start off with onboarding the systems to Defender ATP first. So even if I've still got my McAfee running on this endpoint, I'll still onboard to Defender ATP. In fact, then I can actually go in and see here on my endpoints which of them have McAfee installed still, and it'll also probably recommend to turn on real-time protection because it still finds some third-party antivirus on the machine. But the onboarding process can happen independently of swapping out your endpoint protection.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
So we'll, Kevin, are you wrapping up or?
Yep, I'm gracefully buying time for that machine to pop in, but I don't see it just yet.
Okay.
But yeah, that's I can kind of wrap up here, and then if there's any other final questions, I can answer them while we wait.
Kevin, this is Jonathan Hamler. It sounds like Defender ATP can shall we say, eliminate the need for a lot of smaller point solutions? You want to comment on that?
Yeah, bingo. You hit the nail on the head. So a lot of the functionality that we historically would get out of having different agents is all provided now through Defender ATP.
So presumably then, if you keep the other agents on and you keep Defender on, then you can do a side-by-side comparison, right?
Yes and no. I mean, I typically would approach a technical validation proof of concept by swapping out whatever your legacy tooling is completely with the Defender stack, just because, like I was saying earlier, it sort of gives us a best of breed protection when we have full end-to-end visibility on the machine. So example, just a tactical example of that is I don't want my existing AV to go and remove a file when Defender ATP is trying to remove it at the same time. Even though net it's going to get removed, I don't get end-to-end visibility, and my Defender ATP counsel might say, well, there's something strange on this machine. It's still in an active malware state because we weren't the ones that removed that file.
Okay, so not quite that smart.
Just in terms of having end-to-end visibility, yeah, that's the component that I like having the most, kind of drawing the lines between the two platforms.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just trying to understand this. I mean, it's a strategic issue of what do you still need if you've got Defender?
Sure. Yeah.
So Kevin, one question on the chat window. How does this tie in with SCCM?
So we have the ability to onboard, like the script I just ran manually, we can onboard that with SCCM as well. Same concept there, as well as push out all of our AV and exploit guard policies through my SCCM interface. If I've got co-management set up, I can extend my device compliance down to the endpoint as well with the scenarios I described earlier. Does that help answer that question?
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, Kevin, I appreciate the time. This recording will be available, and I'll send a link to the YouTube site and along with Kevin's deck in PDF format over the weekend, early as Monday. With that, I'd like to turn this presentation over to Bob Kelly from Flexera Software as one of our sponsors for a webinar. Usually our sponsors are in person. They provide the lunch and raffles and things like that. But to keep the momentum going and keep our sponsorship list strong until we get to the in-person events again, we are allowing sponsors to come in and kind of talk about their solution and how they fit into the systems management story. So with that, Flexera Software, based in Itasca, Illinois, and they're well known for their admin studio packaging, their acquisition of Zucchini a few years ago, which is now SVM. Bob will kind of review at a high level, I believe, admin studio and how it fits into the systems management platform. Well, it looks like SVM patch management. So sorry, there was some back and forth on the topic.
Yeah, it is an overlapping thing. That's why it was easy for me to pivot. I think
Okay.
because we've just been hearing about vulnerability management, I figured rather than continuing or repeating anything we just heard from Kevin, I would talk about Admin Studio's role in that.
Okay.
So
perfect.
So sure. Thanks for having me. The basic problem that we all face is there's too much to do. Packaging takes too long. I was the founder of App Deploy, which is now IT Ninja. So I've had a career around trying to help solve this problem of dealing with the demand for new applications, for functional updates, and of course security updates. So when you would do application deployment or a Windows migration rather, you would have probably a surge of repackaging activities where you'd create a bunch of new packages and make sure you had a new perfect image with your new operating system. And that's how a lot of people looked at the packaging process as kind of a project-based thing. But today, it really is more about the constant updates that are required. You get all these third-party applications. In the example we just saw, Kevin had WinRAR was recommended that we update that. and you can't update that unless you go through the work of creating a package that gets it out there silently the way you want it as quickly as possible. So they say that typically only 1 in 10 patches get deployed. Sorry, one moment. Yeah.
Did we lose something?
No, you had me balanced between two presentations, and I started the wrong one. So I will speed things up here. So you know Admin Studio as the tool that you do that packaging work with, but with the point I'm trying to make is that it's not just about Windows migrations. It's about the need for ongoing deployments and security updates, new software requests. These are coming in all the time, and most of you, if you have anything to do with these application deployments, know that you don't repackage very much these days. You, in most cases, can get away with using the command line support provided by the vendor, depending on the deployment technology that you're using. If it's app V, you're going to do some sequencing, but if it's just a regular traditional automated install, most of the time the vendor gives us what we need these days, and the need to repackage is way down as a result. And so for the last couple of years I've been supporting Admin Studio, I've really been driving the roadmap towards all things that don't have anything to do with repackaging, because there's already quite a set of tools and capabilities that add to the entire process of application management. So compatibility testing, knowing which applications in your environment have Java dependencies is obviously very good to know before you deploy one of the many security updates required by Java. We've got template-based wrapping for PowerShell. So if you use the PowerShell app deploy toolkit to wrap your packages, we can help automate and simplify that process. If you're not a PowerShell fan, we found that a lot of people still use WiseScript to wrap their vendor setups because that's a process they've had and want to keep it going. We've since added that application to the app deploy or the Admin Studio suite as well, so that people that aren't comfortable with PowerShell can enjoy the same benefits. And then we provide programmatic command line suggestions. We help you edit your package. Obviously, we've got the Install Shield editor. We're developing a new MSIX editor specifically for Admin Studio right now as well. So there's a lot going on, and the MSI customization tuner for making MSTs and the repackaging tool to take a legacy setup and convert it into a automated silent install are the two things most well known when it comes to what you think of with Admin Studio. But the point here is that there's a lot more, and so in looking at on top of all those different tools and capabilities we're providing, how can we help you get your packages taken care of faster? We're looking at, well, what takes the most time? And probably what takes the most time is the research, right? You got to know that there is a new version available. Then you got to download that version. Then you got to figure out what are the silent command line options for that. Can it be customized effectively? Do I have to write a script to do the extra customizations? Do I want to repackage it because the customizations are too complicated to put in my script? There's just a lot to do. And so as a result, we see people looking for things like a patch catalog. Maybe I can get out of some of this packaging work if I subscribe to a catalog. And so there are some free catalogs out there. They're mostly related to vendor hardware vendors, so driver packages. There's one for Adobe, so there's some Adobe packages you can get. There's not much free, but there are a couple of paid SCUP catalogs out there, and that will get you a better percentage of coverage when it comes to your application portfolio. But there simply isn't anything that's going to get you to 100% or close enough to 100% that you feel like you're getting out of a significant amount of work, and that's where Admin Studio really comes in. So we can compete with the catalog and say you don't need it, or we can say, hey, I'll automate and help you get through those things that aren't in the patch catalog you're subscribed to complement it. Either way you want to go. The new thing that we've most recently introduced that really helps facilitate this is called the package feed module, and this is a database of installer details that's within Admin Studio. So we have validated silent command lines for thousands of different installers. There are over 1,500 of those we can download directly into Admin Studio, and we can get the detection criteria to help with the actual application model deployment of those packages as well. Right now, there's about 3,100 different installers that we've covered, and are constantly updating those and taking requests for new ones and growing that database. So it's a huge time saver in terms of the manual process of finding out there's something new and figuring it out and getting it tested. If you're going to repackage, you can use these same silent command lines to automate the repackaging, whether that's to a Windows installer package or a AppV package or MSIX package. The automation that you can get with these silent command lines, even if you're not using them for the actual deployment, is just super valuable. So it kind of looks like this. You, instead of adding an application to Admin Studio by providing a setup file, you can actually just look up the application. So you find which setup it is that you're interested in, and you can choose the latest version is what we're supporting. In almost all cases, there are some exceptions for things like middleware, where we'll keep an older version around longer because so many people are using it. But if there's multiple setups from the vendor because there's different platforms or different setup types or different languages, we'll have them all in here. And you basically just pick the one you want. In most all cases, you can download that directly in Admin Studio. There are cases where we don't have everything we need to give you a complete coverage of the application. So for example, an application that is behind a paywall, we can't host it for you and automatically download it, but we can make you aware that there's a new version. We can have the detection criteria, we can have the tested command line, and but most of the time you can download it directly in here and save some time. And then we give you the silent command line arguments that we have done the research and testing for already. So pretty huge time saver. You can obviously tweak that if you want to. If you know more, you've been to IT Ninja or wherever and found additional parameters that you want to put in, you can. And in the future, we're actually looking to extend this a little further and provide for a subset of the applications, more of a custom installation wizard interface where you can check boxes for, turn off automatic updates, don't put a desktop on the shortcut, those types of customizations that you might otherwise have to do a bunch of research for. We'll provide more of a graphical interface. And of course, that's step one, right? Getting that application into Admin Studio. And then once you have it there, there's a tremendous amount of testing we can do to tell you application compatibility, conflicts, dependencies. We can report on all of those. You can drill in and see all kinds of different views of your application portfolio. You can convert those to a number of different formats. We've got pretty much every application virtualization format popular in the enterprise covered today. Obviously, MSIX being not quite virtualization, but it really is under the covers, and that's a big one we've been investing a lot in and getting a lot of interest on. If there's a problem identified with a conflict between applications, or a problem with best practices, or a problem with application compatibility, in many cases we have automated fixes for those. Where we don't, we give you the information you need to fix it, but in many cases we can automatically fix it. Wrapping I discussed, PowerShell as well as EXE, and then publishing. We can publish it right off to SCCM or Landesk or Altiris or Workspace ONE or whatever endpoint management system you might be using. And then, I know this crowd likes PowerShell, and I do too. The Admin Studio product provides commandlets. We've got like 40 or something different commandlets that will let you automate pretty much everything Admin Studio can do from a script or command line. And so what we've developed a proof of concept for is the ability to take a list of applications from, say, your SCCM inventory or some software asset management database you have. All we need is the vendor and the title, and we can automatically match those to things that are in that database. And when we find them, automatically download them, automatically convert them, automatically publish them, whatever it is you want to do. And the script to do so is in the Flexera community. I've got a video that shows you how it works, the script itself, as well as an article that details how to go about it. And I referred to this a second ago as a proof of concept, and that's really what it was, because I knew that this was something I ultimately wanted in the product, and that's going to be coming very soon. This is a sneak peek at what we intend to be releasing late next month, where you'll be able to take a CSV file and match it to what's in your catalog, match it to what's in the package feed module database, and then just schedule what you want to do. So you could say, I'm subscribed or schedule this package, and then based on your settings in the application, and this is a mock-up, of course, you can have it automatically download and import it, automatically test it, automatically wrap it the way you want to wrap it with the template that you want, automatically convert it if you'd like, and then automatically publish it for distribution, all hands off. So, a new version of the application comes out, and boom, everything that you would normally do manually can be completely automated for thousands of applications. And that is pretty much the story that I wanted to tell. I know a lot of you probably have Admin Studio. It may be a very old version of Admin Studio because you haven't needed to dust it off in a while. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to highlight the fact that it is much more than a repackaging tool. It's a pretty robust suite of different tools that work together, and it's now evolved to the point where it can save you a considerable amount of time.
So Bob, a question in the chat, what's the integration with SCCM and Intune?
The integration with SCCM is right now we can publish to SCCM. We can fully fill in all the details for the application model so that application is ready to deploy in Admin Studio. I mean in SCCM. And in this same release where we're introducing the package automation, we're also introducing Intune support. So in the very same way, you'll be able to use Admin Studio's detailed knowledge of the application, its dependencies, the name, the details, and save you the time of actually adding it to Intune or SCCM.
So when you publish to SCCM, you have the option to make it an application model or package?
We're supporting the application model.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And in the future, we're gonna take another step forward where I said right now you can provide a CSV file, and we'll do the matching off of that. In the future, you'll see us integrate directly with SCCM, so we can see what applications you have in your SCCM inventory, and automatically do the matching in the product, so you can see which those applications is being managed, and the status and the availability of new versions of those applications, and hopefully in many cases the ability to then automate those as new ones become available.
Perfect, thank you. So I'll send Bob's information and Flexera's information as part of the follow-up as well. So I appreciate you guys hopping on and educating us on your solutions. Any other questions for Bob before he jumps off? And I'm not sure if he's going to stay on or not, but you could also add to the chat window. And if he's not on, I'll get those questions to him.
Oh, I'll definitely stick around.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
Thanks again. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. With that, our final presentation, Steve from Microsoft, Premier Field Engineer. If you've been in the Chicago user group meeting before in person, Steve's presented a couple of times over the last couple of years, flew in and talked about all things around SCCM and automation. So with that, Steve's topic today is around task sequences and the application model. So, Steve?
Well, all of a sudden, I'm very nervous. How are y'all? I was hoping that that we would be able to get in person and have food and all that, but yeah, it's all right, cool. So how's everyone on this Friday? I appreciate the chance to talk about this, and what I do want to present is specifically on a new capability that we have introduced. It's in 2002 of Config Manager, and specifically what you see on the screen is that this is part 18 of a series that I have done on application management, right? On application management. And so what that means is that there's 17 other parts to application management that I have in Config Manager. Why do I tell you this? Because if you're interested in the discussion about application management, so my personal belief and what, especially with this edition, and I know this kind of contradicts a bit what some of the other discussions were on the call to some degree, and it's not really a contradiction, it's just a discussion, right? There's multiple options that you have, and that's cool. But one of the things that I really try to encourage people to do is use the application model natively as much as you can, right? And I challenge people to give me a scenario where you can't use the application model natively. And so far, no one has given me such a scenario, especially now that we add the task sequence integration into the application model. I really would challenge someone to give me a scenario that we can't handle natively, right? So there's a lot of tangents we can go off on this. And again, the reason I tell you this is part 18 is there's 17 other parts, and they will soon, so that all the application model stuff up until part 16, 17, and 18 is based on Configuration Manager 2012, because that's where it was introduced. And the good news is it hasn't changed really a great deal in those initial modules from 2012. But the good news also is we've made some tweaks to the application model now that I'm talking about. And so if you want to see those will soon be published to the product group's YouTube channel. Pay attention, stay tuned for that. I just need to get them uploaded. Anyway, so here to talk about task sequence integration, and would love to have an interactive discussion rather than just me talking. If there's something y'all want to know about, certainly raise it as we go through. So here's kind of the agenda. What is this thing? What are task sequence deployment types in the application model? Why do we even care? What are the requirement scenarios? Basically, how does it work? Want to show you how it gets configured, and then show it to you actually working in a demo, and we'll wrap up with some troubleshooting tips and tricks type discussions as we go through. So what are task sequence deployment types? Well, basically, these were introduced in 2002 of Config Manager. That's what you'll see me use in a minute. This capability is currently pre-release. Now, let me take a little tangent on that for a minute. Every time I talk about pre-release, I want to at least highlight this, right? And by the way, as I'm taking a tangent, I'm going to take another one. So Jay mentioned that I've been at the Chicago Users Group in person a few times. That's true. I don't know how I'm perceived just as a voice on the phone, but just think about a really tall guy that has a very loud voice that you can't turn down in person, but you can turn down on your computer. So you can decide whether that's an advantage or not. Anyway, so now pre-release. Pre-release, whenever we first started introducing features as pre-release, we did not do ourselves any favors, because you will, hopefully you don't find any anymore, but there was documentation to say don't use pre-release features in production. That is absolutely untrue, right? Pre-release features are 100% supported in production. So if what I'm going to describe to you is useful to you, then use it, right? Absolutely use it. The thing about pre-release features that you will know if you kind of follow the features that have been released, pre-release over time, is the core functionality of that feature is the same today as it was initially. There's just additions made to the feature to make it more useful and usable and things like that. And so a good example of that is Cloud Management Gateway. It was introduced. It's the same today as it was then. We've added features around it to make it more compelling, more useful, and so on, but its core is the same. Same thing here. I kind of have some anticipation of what I will see as we go forward. I don't know that to be a fact, so I won't talk about it, but it is pre-release. Don't be nervous by that, right? And also, what is this task sequence deployment type? It is a big shocker. It is a new deployment type in the application model. Well, thanks, Steve. That was very informative, right? But it is, right? It is another way to do application deployment. So that's what it is. Now, why do we care? So one of the challenges that you might have with the application model that requires doing packaging or repackaging or doing something inventive is when you have a complex application deployment. I get it, right? Now, within the existing app model before this, there were ways to deal with certain complex requirements, right? If you really understand how the application model works, you can tap into those advantages. Things like running a script for a deployment type and doing other things during that deployment type script. Let me tangent off that well, I'll try to come back to that whenever we get into the actual demo, and I'll talk about that. But yeah, there's ways that you can handle even complex scenarios in the app model prior to this. But now, when you have the task sequence, anyone who's used a task sequence knows the amazing power that can be brought to bear using a task sequence, right? So being able to take full advantage of that task sequence engine to manage the nuances of application deployment. Do you need to reboot during a task sequence? Great, go for it, totally supported. Do you have nested task sequences? Great, do that, totally supported. Do you need to uninstall? Yes, you can support that, right? Other things that you might ask that you need to do. And the thing is, when you do the task sequence deployment type, big shocker here, it installs like an application, right? So it shows up in Software Center just like normal. It's kicked off just like normal. The one difference, and honestly, I don't know if this is intended. I think it is. I do have a question out internally to the product team to make sure of this, but one thing that you will notice when I kick this off in the lab in just a minute, there is no task sequence progress bar, right? Well, if you think about application installations for any other type, there's no indication of progress other than the fact in the Software Center it says, hey, I'm downloading content. Hey, I'm installing now. Hey, I'm finished and I'm successful. All that's intact. But the big bar that comes up on the screen to indicate typically that a task sequence is running and an OS is being deployed and so on, that doesn't happen, right? And it makes sense why it wouldn't, because now we're just installing an application that happens to use a task sequence, right? Okay, so you'll see that in a minute. Now, so what are the requirements? Well, you need Config Manager 2002, right? You need that on both the server and on the client in order to take advantage of this. You need a task sequence, right? Big surprise. And so there's a few requirements of the task sequence. It must be a non-OS deployment task sequence. Specifically, no imaging steps, no boot image at all. Non-OS deployment, non-OS upgrade as well, right? So can't have, again, dealing with any kind of deployment of things. So I'm going to bring in the lab early real quick just to show you some of these things here. All right, so let me go back to the lab. So under software, sorry, I was doing some software update stuff. So under the task sequence section, if you go to any task sequence, and this is my demo one, it says demo, so you know it is, and I go to properties on it, there's a user notification tab. And here is where you can toggle the task sequence as being high impact. High impact meaning dangerous, right? Use with caution, be very careful. That would screen out this task sequence from being able to be used with an application. So just make sure this is not a high impact task sequence, right? Then there's certain steps that you can use and certain steps you cannot. So if I go edit this task sequence, which you'll see it before I'm going to run it to you, but there's certain steps here. Any of these steps that do not require being in an operating system deployment mode, you're good. So none of the imaging steps would work. These don't work. But under general, things like run command line, run PowerShell script, all of these, this one you wouldn't want to use, but all these work. You know, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine, right? That's fine. So you have to be careful which task sequence steps you use, but they're functional, no problem, right? No problem at all. The apps and the packages. Now, so with the apps and the packages, you need to make sure that they are set to be able to be used through a task sequence. This is not unique to the application model having the task sequence. This is in general, but let me show you what I'm talking about. So if I go to an application, if I go to an application, and I'm just going to go to this one, doesn't matter really, and go to a deployment type and select properties on the deployment type, then let me find it. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Oh, I'm going to not find it. Where is it? Wait. Ah, yes. Right here. No, that's not true. There's a switch in here. Where is it? It's probably on the application. Maybe it is. Anyway, so on the application and on the package itself, there's allow the application to be installed from the install application task sequence step without being deployed. That's critical. If you don't have that, it won't show up for you. Same thing on packages, except there, the option is part of the program, not the application as a whole, right? So those are really important as well. All right. Now, what are some scenarios for this, right? What are some scenarios? So specifically, and you might add your own here. So I just put in a few as a thing to talk about. So application dependencies, right? So we have supported in the app model the ability to do application dependencies, no problem. But what we don't have there is the ability to specify order of operations, right? Now, usually you'll get a consistent response, but that's not 100%. With a task sequence, yeah, you can control exactly what needs to happen. I think of a customer scenario that needed to add in an Outlook add-in in a specific way, reboot in between, do another couple of tweaks in the registry, blah, blah, blah. That's really hard with the application model. You can get it done, you really can, but it's not as straightforward as the task sequence. So being able to use the task sequence will nail these dependencies and being able to do that. Reboot scenarios. So that's the one thing you couldn't really solve with the application model natively, is being able to persist through a reboot. Now, again, could you? Yeah, there's some ways that we can use scripting maybe to do some things. There's some inventive scheduled task things we could do, but it wasn't a clean experience by any means, right? So reboot scenarios, totally fine with the task sequence. Specific order of operations, absolutely with the task sequence. You can add your own that might be interesting to you here, right? Bottom line, so the way I do, if you have not worked with the task sequence engine, please look at it, because wow, it is as powerful as a programming language. It is a mini programming language. That's what it is, right? It's a graphical thing, but it has the logic and flow and structure of a programming language because of what it does, right? Okay, so what are the oh, I went back. Sorry, go forward. Now, the how it works, I haven't put in there yet because I don't know if I'm going to actually put in anything here. Nothing really special is the app model, but it is a task sequence, so I'm kind of still thinking about that. In terms of configure, well, let me pause. Before I go into configure, I'm going to pull the lab in and we're going to do a few things. Let me pause for a minute. Love to hear any comments, discussion, feedback, even if it's not a question, just throw a comment in. Love to hear any thoughts if you have them. Let me pause for a second. No comments. Wow. Okay, cool. So let's keep going. So in terms of configuring this, let's pull in the lab, and we're going to spend some time in the lab from this point forward. All right. So what do you need? You need to have your task sequence built. I already showed you where I have mine built. All right. So you need to have yours built so that you can actually go do this. This is all you need. You need to have your apps configured. Okay. Again, you need to have no OS specific task sequence steps in there. Now let's talk about strategy here for a minute. So whenever you install something with the application model, you may, in fact, you do want to plan for uninstalling that same application. That is just as true with task sequences as it is with any other type. And let me underscore something for a minute. And I will say it very directly. If you are building something in the application model and you do not have an uninstall command line configured, you are doing it wrong, right? Now, do we force you to do the uninstall command line? No. But if you do not have the uninstall command line configured, you do not have the ability to use the application model the way it was intended, right? So things like supersedence. You don't have the ability to do the uninstall of the app you're superseding. That's bad. In terms of dependencies, there's some things in there. In terms of application groups and being able to uninstall that, we haven't talked about that, but that's certainly a topic. You can't uninstall application groups. If you don't have a task sequence that's defined with uninstall, you can't uninstall it. It is a terrible practice to build any application and not have an uninstall command line. Period, right? Love to talk about that if there's a scenario that you think might be supported by that, right? So how do you do an uninstall if your deployment of an application is being driven by a task sequence? It's a great question, right? So you'll see when I go through the wizard to set up the application, there's a place for a task sequence to install, pardon me, the app, and there's a place with the task sequence to uninstall the app. Well, so if we're thinking through that the task sequence is here to support you in some complex scenarios, then one of the beauties of the task sequence is it documents everything in a very simplistic visual format, right? And if you use the task sequence to install, there's a couple of options for you, maybe more than a couple of options to uninstall. One might be, and I just throw this out here, I haven't done it. You know, with task sequences, you can control what I would envision. Let me just pop this up for a minute and we'll talk through this in a minute. But what I could envision is that you would have a group, and I'm not going to actually do it here and save it, but I'm going to hit a new group, for example, and I'll move that to the top. And then move all these underneath. Oh, right. So this is where the task sequence is logical, right? So, and by the way, I'll ask a question here and then I will answer it for you. Is this movement of steps in the task sequence underneath this new group I created, is that purely for aesthetic purposes for your eye, or does that have a functional purpose? And usually if I ask the room that I'm talking to that, I wait for an answer. But here, the answer is absolutely, this has a structural purpose. This is not just aesthetic, right? So what I would envision is that I might have a group up here called install application. And then I might have another group down, and these steps define how I want to install it. And then I might add another group down here called uninstall application, right? Right, and so I've already got the steps maybe defined up here to install, And so maybe I just copy them and mimic them down here, but I do them in reverse order or whatever. I change them as I need to. And so the way I control this is I would say, okay, and I'm not going to get into the details as to the how and all. There's several ways I can think about it, but maybe I would have a variable in here, a conditional that says, hey, this indicates I'm going to go do an install. So let's go do an install, right? And this is the steps we would follow. There's ways we can maybe tap into WMI for that, the registry for that, file system for that. There's several ways we could get at that data. But if I'm triggering an uninstall, I would have that same variable to say, no, I'm going to do an uninstall. So we're going to follow this branch and completely ignore this one. So point is, I could do uninstall and install in the exact same task sequence, right? I could. Now, another option would be to have two task sequences, right? And the first one does the install, the second one does the uninstall, and you don't worry about the variables. You just call whichever one you want, right? Which you'll see that in a minute. Right? So then there may be other options that you do as well. Right? Here's the other thing that I would tell you about, and I would at least call out in a warning format. And this is not at all to detract from the usability of a repackaging kind of scenario, but I warn you about it only because you need to think through it. If you're installing as part of the task sequence something that, and I see customers do this, something that is repackaged, then the way the if you're installing an application, whether it be through the task sequence or not through the task sequence, doesn't matter, and its source is something that is a repackaged MSI or something like that, then whenever we go through the wizard and we point at that repackaged MSI that we want to deploy, that ultimately will deploy the application we care about, we will read detail from that MSI. And we'll populate it in the wizard, things like the MSI GUID and such. There is at least the possibility, and I've seen it happen, where whenever we pick up that application GUID, that's great to install the application. But we also put that in the detection logic, and we also put that by default in the uninstall command line in some cases like MSI. The challenge with that is, depending on configuration, if you choose to uninstall a repackaged application, you may uninstall the application in total, or you may just uninstall the wrapper because you're referring to the GUID of the wrapper, not the actual detail of the application. Same thing with detection logic. If your detection logic is based on the presence of the wrapper, it's not going to be potentially as effective. You might deinstall the application from a machine totally, but yet the wrapper is still saying in the registry that I'm installed, and we'll think it's installed. We're not going to ever install it again, right? Potentially. So I just call that out. Same thing is true in a task sequence if you're referring to things that are MSIs that are repackaged and so on, right? Okay. Now, so bottom line, absolutely make sure that you build an install task sequence because you have to, and then also an uninstall task sequence, okay? Now you need to have the application or package configured to allow it to deploy. Already talked about that, right? Already talked about that, so I'm not going to go do that again. Has to be out there. Not only that, but you need to make sure that the content for the application or package is on a distribution point. So here you see that one's not, this one should be, right? So I have that out and deployed to a distribution point. Have to make sure it's out there. That's nothing unique to the task sequence deployment type of application. That's true in general. But what is interesting, let me go through this. This is what I was going to talk about a minute ago. But let me talk about this, right? So if I go into the deployment type, this is just a standard application. This is not any task sequence related application right now. If I go into the detection method, right? Detection method. So sorry, I got distracted by another screen and I'm turning away from it. So the what you configure here is absolutely critical to understand how this works. Because if you don't, it may work for you, but you may not be able to take full advantage of the application model. Here's what I mean. Let me give you the example of what I mean by scenario. So I mentioned to you that I encourage people to give me scenarios they could not solve with the application model, even before we had the task sequence. And one of the customers I was dealing with gave me a scenario, said, look, we have a legacy piece of software internally that we built that every time we install an application, we have to lay down what's called a key file. I actually have a blog on this where I talked about it and show how you get around this. You have a key file, and that key file that we need to lay down as part of the application is a flag to tell this other piece of software that we use for asset management that that application is actually in place on the device. Now, you can argue, as I did, that that's kind of a silly way to do it because Config Manager tells you that, and it does, but they were reliant on it. So they were one of their big reasons, not their only, but one of their big reasons for repackaging is so that they had control over where this key file was laid down and when it was, when it wasn't, that kind of thing. Great, right? And I told them that's not a roadblock. You can absolutely do that exact same thing with the application model, to which I just got a bunch of blank stares, which I love. Yeah, that's great. And so how would you do something like that, right? How would you do something like that? Well, if you understand how the application model works in terms of detection methodology, it's not a problem, right? So all I had them do, again, I have it on a blog, all I had them do is in the detection method, yeah, we're all about being interested in detecting whether the app is there or not. There's ways that we can do that. There's default ways. You can use the registry, file system, MSIs to determine if the app is installed. You can use combinations of those, but you can also use a script. Right now, you want to be careful here. I don't want a script that's going to take 5 hours to execute. 5 minutes is too long. But if we can do a really quick script that takes just a few seconds to execute through, 20, 30 seconds, whatever it is, not massive, then this is a really interesting scenario. So when you do any application deployment, and why detection logic is so critical, is when that policy arrives on a device, the very first thing it does is it runs detection based on your configured parameters to say, hey, this is going to need to come down. I need to figure out if it's there. So I'm going to run my detection logic and find out, is this thing that I'm required to deploy actually already installed? If the answer is yes, then we don't install it. We just mark it as successful and move on. If it is not installed, then we run that initial detection, find out, no, it's not installed. Then we go do the installation, and then we loop back and validate the installation using your detection logic. So your detection logic must be perfect, right? So knowing that, what we did, and again, the script's on the blog entry, is we used a very simple PowerShell script to, when we did the detection for the app, we would make a decision. Hey, the app's not there. Well, hey, if the app's not there, is the key file still there? If it is, okay, great, delete it. And then we're done, right? But if we run the detection logic and find out, hey, the app is there, we look, is the key file there? No? Well, we're going to add it, right? And then we did a couple other things to manage it. But that kind of ability in the native application model is already at your fingertips, not even to mention the task sequence. And so there's other ways, there are requirement rules and some scripting and some different things in there that you can do some pretty amazing things, right? But it's all boiling down to knowing the application model. And then we introduce the task sequence, which gives even more capability, right? So let me walk through for a minute. I'm just going to take this this task sequence here, or sorry, this application, and it's not one that I've actually got built this way, but I'm just going to walk through adding a deployment type to this application, and we're going to choose the task sequence deployment type. So here we go. I've already got one. This is MSI. So I'm going to click add, and we're going to get a wizard up here like you're used to seeing, and we will see in the dropdown that we have this task sequence deployment type. And then we immediately shift to the fact we need to manually specify the info. It's still going to be a wizard tailored to the task sequence deployment type, but you have to manually go through it, right? So let's click next. So the first thing I'm going to be asked for is name, whatever, I don't care. Then I'm going to be asked for what task sequence. So here's where I browse to my task sequences, and I'm going to choose this one as my install. Now, I'm not going to choose one for uninstall because I didn't take the time to build one, but you should in every case in production, right? Could be the same one, could be a different one, doesn't really matter as long as it does the uninstall. Here's your detection method, right? So now here, you don't automatically detect anything from the task sequence. You need to know what your logic will be, right? And so, again, I'm not going to go and belabor the point. I've got one built. I'm just going to add a clause to be able to get past it, and then we'll go look at my real one in a minute. Blah, blah, blah. That's fine, right? That obviously will fail, and that will be a bad thing. Now, user experience. All this is normal, right? Install for user. I would do install for system, but be careful, right? Just make sure that you make the right choice. When you're testing it, leave the defaults the way they are, and then add requirement rules. Here's another one. For my demo, I'm not doing it, but let me just tell you, normally if I were in front of y'all, I would ask you to kind of raise your hands or whatever. What I find is there are people that will build applications that have one deployment type, and they do not have requirement rules. Bad, not the way it's designed. Every single deployment type needs requirement rules. Why? Well, maybe you just have deployment types or applications with one deployment type today. That's great if that meets your needs. But maybe after we see this session or for some other reason, you decide, hey, I want to add another deployment type to this for certain types of scenarios. Great. That's what the application model is designed for. If you add two deployment types and neither one of them have requirement rules, you will never, ever, ever, ever install the second one. It will always install the first one, right? Because requirement rules are there to help you decide which of the application deployment types should actually be deployed in a given scenario. Here's another reason. Even if you just have one deployment type, you should, in every case, have requirement rules. Well, there's several reasons. Here, let me add another one. So whenever you add custom requirement rules, you will end up building into global conditions a library of requirement rules that you might want to reuse for different scenarios, right? And here's yet another one. So I see this all the time, even still. Almost guaranteed most of you do this, right? So many people use the Config Manager 2012 current branch collection structure in the exact same way they did in Configuration Manager 2007. Incredibly bad practice, right? Can you do it? Absolutely. Should you do it? Absolutely not, right? So here's the deal. Now, if you were to use the application model correctly, you could, and hear me, I don't recommend this, but you could deploy your application to the all systems collection and do so safely. Now, again, I don't recommend deploying to the all systems collection, but you absolutely could safely. So what I still see in so many environments is that people have an application they need to deploy, and they will build a collection of devices that are the ones that need to receive this deployment. My question is, why in the world would you do that? You have so many collections you have to maintain at that stage, where right here in the requirement rules, you can build the exact logic for systems that need the deployment and no one else. And so if you now have collections that are instead structured on, HR maybe, or engineering, or factory systems, or whatever combination makes sense to you, let's take factory systems, and you have a deployment that needs to go out to the factory systems, but not all factory systems, only some, then say your collection of factory systems is 1,000 devices, and you need to actually deploy it on 800 devices. You can target the entire collection of factory systems and then offload the collection processing from the site server to the client, let the client evaluate the requirement rules and find out, hey, I need this, or hey, I don't need this, right? And so that will help you right away be able to maximize efficiency on your environment, okay? So hugely, hugely important, not unique to task sequences, absolutely necessary though. So I'm going to exit the wizard here because that's it. Really, there's dependencies I can put in and whatever. I'll exit the wizard. Okay. So we talked about that, talked about adding it in, talked about deployment types and so on. Now, let me show you actually this working. All right, let me show this to you working. So what I've done is I have this application via task sequence, and I put some things in here to show you that I'm not actually going to use because I just don't want to wait for the time. But here's my main task sequence. I do have a nested one that I'm not going to call. Again, I don't want to take the time, but I'm going to edit this and show you. So this is going to be very simple. I'm going to set a task sequence variable. I'm going to dump the task sequence variable. I could do a restart here, fully supported. I'm going to install my application. That would actually reach out and do a rich copy install. Here's the deal, and I'll say this again. So you'll read, and this is a pre-release feature, and so this is one of those things. If you read our pre-release documentation, we will tell you, do not use an install application task sequence step. It's listed as a known issue. Now, I've tested with the install application task sequence step, and it works. Where you're going to run into problems is if you actually pick an application that itself has a task sequence deployment type within a task sequence, right? That's going to be a problem, at least right now. That may be cleaned up over time. I imagine it will be, but right now that's a known issue. So the recommendation is to use the install package step instead. So you can do whatever. Again, it does work, but be careful. So that's why that one's grayed out. Here's where I would call into a dependency task sequence. I'm not going to do that. It's grayed out because I don't want to take the time, but I built it, right? And then here's where I would go install my package. Again, I've grayed it out. It works. I just don't want to take the time. I'm just going to run through it quickly, okay? So here's my task sequences. Now, my application is built up here, right here, application via task sequence, and I've got my deployment type here. And my detection method is now my product code, which that's rich copy, which I would be installing. Here's my, and by the way, if you don't have this correct, you can install your task sequence 100% and it will always show failed. That's why it has to be correct. And then the task sequences are here and so on, right? So that's all there and good to go, right? In fact, I need to shift that for a moment just so I don't forget something. Okay. Now on the client. So I've actually got this deployed. Here it is. It's deployed to all systems. Let me pull in one of my test clients. Well, let me go get one of my test clients. I thought I had it open. Let me go get it. I heard some noise on the line. Is there a question? Okay, cool. Just making sure. Here's my Windows 10 machine. I think I have it configured right, but just in case. Okay. Yeah, I need to do this. Hang on a second. I have rich copy here. I thought I removed it. Let me get rid of it. Because I want this to think it needs to install. So programs and features. Here's rich copy. Uninstall you. Goodbye. Okay, so now I'm going to kick. You're going to see what I'm going to do here. I'm doing this on purpose to trick the task sequence, but let me go show you. I should have stayed in there. So now I'm going to run the application detection cycle, and it's going to think, oh, I don't have it. And it's correct. Now I've uninstalled it. All right. So now I'm set to install. Now, what I want to do, because the detection logic will fail on this if I don't have rich copy installed, I'm just going to go ahead and install it again so that I have it there and the detection logic finds it okay. So rich copy setup, let me go run that, next, next. Of course I agree, next, 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 off it goes. So now rich copy is there. Cool, cool, cool. So rich copy is in place, so my detection logic should work. I'm still showing install application. Now, I'm also going to go delete my SMSTS log because I want you to see it from the beginning. Goodbye. So any SMSTS log we get will be from this task sequence. So I'm just going to click install. And it's going to be really, really, really exciting. Are you ready? Here we go. Install. Waiting to apply. Installed. And we're done. All right. Now, what did you not see? You did not see any task sequence, anything pop up. It just works exactly like a task sequence, right? But now, let me go look at my logs. So I do have, I think I do. Where's my SMSTS log? Did it write it? It should have. Come on now. It did not write a task sequence log. Well, that's interesting. Here, let me try that one more time and see if I can get it to do what it should have done just then. If not, it's okay, not a big deal, but let me see if I can try to do that. In fact, I may just take a failure as the response code to it so I don't have to worry about this. Let me see what happens. So I'm going to uninstall that, goodbye, and then do the, oops, I should not have closed that. And then do the application detection again. All right, good. So that should be back to not installed. Come on. All right, let's try that again. Bam, install. Let's do it. Waiting to begin. Installing. Okay, good. So it's running through. Oh, that's why. Because it detected it was there, it never ran it. That's the detection logic. That was me. So it's actually running through. It's going to come back and it's going to say failed. But what we have is right now we'll have the SMSTS log. And there it is. And so I'm going to open this, and you see that it's going through its gyrations. The only thing that I would expect is that it would actually be dumping some task sequence variables. There's the policy, processing assignment, some different things. And so the log is, as normal. Let me go through here. Yeah, so here you see it dumping the variable names. That's what I would expect that it would do. And we're good, right? So here's the deal. The task sequence 100% runs, no problem, exactly like it should. It came back failed because my detection logic doesn't match at this stage. Wasn't anything stellar. The user didn't see the task sequence window pop up. The user just saw the install of the application happen, just like normal. No big deal, right? No big deal. Now, let me get this machine out of the way and switch forward to this one, right? Now, troubleshooting. So that's it, right? That's it. This concept, guys, is not difficult. It's really pretty straightforward. But the implications of this are massive, right? They're absolutely massive. Again, there ain't nothing you can't deploy without the task or with the task sequence engine natively, right? So there you go. Now, in terms of kind of turning the page to start to wrap up, troubleshooting tips and tricks, there are a few. So troubleshooting is exactly normal for a task sequence. You use the SMSTS log, just like normal, right? For the application install or the package install, for the install of it, you would, of the package, of the application, of the registry keys, of the changes you want to make, it'll be in the SMSTS log. For the application install, the application, parent application, this one right here, to watch it, right, you have to use the application logs just like normal. So what is the key application log? Well, the key application log is app enforce. And so here you will see this being evaluated just like normal. Here's the detection. We can go up, we can find another one. So app not discovered, we do the discovery again at the end. And even though the installation was successful, the task sequence ran, we didn't discover the detection logic, so we call it an error. That's why I see a failed, right? Even though the task sequence ran. So that is a standard log for troubleshooting any kind of application deployment, including task sequence, right? Okay, so let me get rid of this and just a couple of tips and tricks. So one of the things also that we document as a known issue right now is that you cannot deploy to a user collection, not currently supported. Whenever you looked at the, if you want to see this when it first came in the 1905 technical preview docs, it called out that user collections were supported. So I anticipate they will be supported in the future, but just not right now, right? We again call out, do not use the install application task sequence step. I talked about why that is. It does actually work, but just be careful with it. But I want to, as we wrap up, I want to really vision the bigger picture of this, right? So where all do we use task sequences? Well, we use them for imaging. We now can use them for applications, right? But we also, so it's really interesting how work streams converge. One of the work streams that's talked about a lot these days is autopilot. And autopilot is a fantastic way to build systems. There's lots of opportunity in Intune to be able to build configurations. You should invest in that and be able to implement that the settings that you need through Intune. But one of the things that we have enabled, and it's enabled in 2002, so if you want this, get to 2002 as quickly as you can, is the ability, so what most customers do who have Config Manager but want to use Autopilot is the first thing they do is they install the Configuration Manager client and enter into a co-managed scenario. Well, a lot of the questions that I hear from people that are trying to figure out whether they want to use Intune or use Config Manager is, hey, I need to be able to deploy a baseline set of applications, different things. How can I do that with Intune? And there are answers in Intune through policy sets and some different group structures and different things. The best answer, hands down, is to use a task sequence. And so in Config Manager 2002, you can actually tag on a switch to the Config Manager command line, install command line, to say, basically, hey, Config Manager client, as soon as you are installed to the point that you're functional, go run this task sequence that I'm giving you on the command line by ID. That means we don't have to wait for policy, we don't have to wait for collection evaluation, we don't have to wait for anything except the client install to be wrapped up. And so the direction that a lot of customers are taking is they're going to build their baseline configuration still with the work they've invested in OSD, non-OS imaging task sequence like we're talking about, and go ahead and configure that baseline build using that. It is a phenomenal approach. Then you enter into where we have applications that can use task sequences, and then we have traditional imaging that can use task sequences, and then we have the ability to attach child task sequences to a parent task sequences, and now you see an entire ecosystem in the task sequence world that fully supports imaging, that imaging can take advantage of the work that your application teams do to build applications with task sequencing and just snap that in as a part of the task sequence. right? Hand off control, do the install application, maybe even use the task sequence that they built directly, snap it into the imaging as a child task sequence. You see the work that we can take advantage of with autopilot, and it is a tremendous story. And with that, I'm done. I do have a hard stop here in about 3 minutes, but I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
No questions? Give another minute if you guys have questions. If there's anything in the chat window, let me just double check. Looks like you answered that along the way. Nope, I don't see anything there. Well, if no questions, Chief, thank you for your time today. Kevin, I think you dropped off as well, and Bob from Flexera. Appreciate it. The recording of this webinar, the user group meeting, will be uploaded to my YouTube channel, and I'll share that back through the mailing list, as well as the presentation decks from Steve and Kevin. And then we'll schedule, I'll send out a survey as well along with that to kind of get some ideas for next topics. And we'll probably do another remote session within the next 2 months. I'm trying to keep this momentum going. And hopefully the topics you guys choose, we could get some speakers for that. With that, I appreciate everybody jumping on and those who stayed on for the last 2 hours. Everyone have a good weekend, stay safe and healthy, and we'll talk to you next time.
Y'all be good. See you.